Well, hey there. Welcome to the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. I'm your host. Now, if you're new here, this show is dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement by figuring out the money part. It's about having the confidence to truly lean in and rock retirement, which is definitely about the money, but it's about so much more. So I'm excited that you're here with me. Right now, I am recording remotely. That's why we didn't have any intro music. We've been in Colorado for about 6 weeks, going home in a few days. It will be nice to get back home, for sure. And it will be nice to be back in the studio because I feel like I'm out of sorts as we're chatting here. Now, today, since it's the first show of the month, we're going to talk about some of the books I've read and maybe give you some ideas. And maybe you have some ideas for me, which would be awesome. And then we're going to spend time answering your questions. In fact, this entire month is about your questions. So if you have a question for the show, go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger. And you can leave a written question. You can leave an audio question. Pro tip, we try to get to audio questions earlier. So if you want to get your question answered earlier, that will definitely be a feather in your cap. So that's the plan for today. So let's get started, eh? Today's show is sponsored by the Rock Retirement Club. This is our online platform where you will have virtually everything you need to learn how to build your retirement plan, to build it with world-class retirement planning software, and then have the support you need through my team and a community of people exactly like you, all on the same journey in a safe place to have adult discussions. So we're going to be opening up open enrollment for the club in late October. So if you want to get updates on that, go to rockretirementclub.com and you can enter your name and email, and then you'll be notified when we're opening up. And we'll also have a few open houses so you can understand what the club is to see if it's a good match for you. You learn more about that at rockretirementclub.com. So earlier this year, we started a segment, usually at the first of the month, where we talked about some books that I've read. And I got a lot of great feedback because I'm guessing you're a big reader. And I've actually gotten a lot of great suggestions from listeners like you. So I thought every month, and I haven't done it in a few months, so we'll have a few more books. Talk about some books I've read, and maybe they will give you some ideas of something that might help you on your journey. I figured I'd start this off by talking about how I approach reading, because I think everybody has a different approach. And mine is very much inspired by Cal Newport, who is a professor at Georgetown. He is a great author. Wrote Deep Work and a few other books, and he has a podcast that really the one podcast I listen to right now. And so I'm very much inspired by how Cal Newport does it. So here's how I approach reading. Number one is I try to make it my default activity, meaning that if I have a moment where Shauna isn't home and I'm just waiting for her for whatever reason, or I have just time, rather than go to the TV, rather than go to my phone, I will just pick up a book and read. Even in the little moments where if I'm sitting in the car and she's running in to do something, I'll just sit there and read a page or two and then definitely sit on the porch and read. So I just try to make it a default activity rather than checking my email or turning on the TV. I've been fairly successful for that, and I like that. Number two is it varies based on interest. Now, my wife would say that I read very boring books because they don't have vampires in them. A lot of my books are nonfiction. I read business books, I read retirement books, and yeah, that's sort of dry, but I'm a nerd. I like it. I geek out on that. But I do try to vary my interest, and you'll see that in the reading list that I have for this last 2 months or so. And number three, I always have more than one book going on at a time. So I don't just read one book to the finish. I usually have 2 or 3, one audiobook, 2 or 3 books sitting around, and I'll just pick up whichever I see or whatever I'm in the mood for. So unless I really get into something, I pretty much just float around to different books. And that seems to work for me. Another thing that has really helped me, and I think I realized this 4 years ago, and I don't know who it was that inspired this, is, hey, you don't have to finish a book. If you don't like it and it's not your jam, put it away and read something else. And that was like a light bulb moment for me. And maybe it should have been years ago, but it's sort of like, that clean plate club. You finish everything on your plate. You start a book, you're supposed to finish it. And that really was liberating for me. Especially when I got into a book, either it really didn't resonate with me or it just wasn't its time for me, I put it away and I don't feel bad about it. Now that has actually evolved to when I get particular books, I won't even read them all the way through. If I'm looking for specific things within the book that I know it has, I'll just go try to find those specific things and not read all the prelude and et cetera. I think of Wade's Files Retirement Handbook that way. I've never read it sequentially. I don't think I've read the whole thing, but I've read almost all of it in different parts. I think of it more as a reference book than something I would read sequentially. And maybe it's because I'm so familiar with the topics, I'm just looking for a refresher or a different viewpoint on something. So I don't think you have to start at the beginning, and I don't think you have to finish a book. And then lastly, I guess I do like physical books. I do read Kindle books, I do audiobooks, but I love physical books. And the way that I take notes, because I write in my books, and this is a Cal Newport thing, is I will highlight or underline something that is important to me, or I think might be important to me, and then I will put an X in the top corner of the page. So as I'm flipping through a book, I can very easily see that X in the top of the page, and then I say, okay, there must have been something important, and I'll go find that. So that's how I do it. I don't really have a system for extracting what I like and putting it into a digital system. I think that would be a great idea. I don't do that as of yet, but hey, we're getting there. All right. So books. Number 1 was The Lost World Z. Let me pull that up here. And this was a book about one of the last great gentleman explorers of England, Percy Fawcett, who was obsessed with the Amazon. So as Shackleton was obsessed with the poles, Percy was obsessed with the Amazon jungle and did numerous expeditions from England to the Amazon. And then eventually with his son, in search of this lost world Z that he became very obsessed about later in his life, that was some magical civilization that existed at some point that was deep in the jungle. He and his son went in, followed all these leads that they had developed over the years, and were never seen again. The second book on my list is Hero of Two Worlds, The Marquis de Lafayette in the Age of Revolution by Michael Duncan, who I believe is actually a history podcaster. I've never heard him, but I think my son did. And it essentially follows Lafayette from his birth in France to as a minor nobleman growing up and then going to America with some other Frenchmen to take part in the American Revolution. And Lafayette ended up befriending George Washington, and they carried on a friendship throughout his life. And he was always there in many important parts of the American Revolution. And then eventually he came home and ended up having various roles through the French Revolution. So it was a little bit of a long book. It was very interesting, very detailed about his life. I like to see the theme, and I'm like, wow, this dude just seemed to weave himself into some major events. What an interesting life. Not much of a family man back then in the way that families were structured with the men going off and everything. So there definitely is that, but it was a very interesting book. And then from that book, it led me to read Tale of Two Cities, which is about the French Revolution by Dickens. And I had never, well, maybe I'd read it, but I don't remember, but I didn't know much about the French Revolution. And that was an excellent book and actually pretty quick read as well. To vary a little bit, so early on when we got to Colorado, I read maybe 2 different Michael Connelly books on Harry Bosch, which is one of the detective series. Lord knows how many books there are, but I think I read 2 of those. I read The Old Man. I don't know who wrote that, but we'll find out. And by the way, We will have links to all of these books in our 6-Shot Saturday email. So don't try to remember them. We'll put links into them, and that way you can find them. And if you're not signed up for our 6-Shot Saturday weekly email, you can go to 6shotsaturday.com or you can go to rogerwhitney.com. So I started watching the series, The Old Man, on Prime, which one of the bridges in it. It's about an old spy who things start happening. So I figured I'd read the book. It was a good book. I like the book. And then I also read The Shortness of Life by Seneca. That's one. You want to talk about a book that's been highlighted? A lot of highlights in that book. Good book. And then the book that I'm going to finish tomorrow is The Second Mountain by David Brooks. And first book I've read by David Brooks. He has another book called The Road to Character, The Social Animal. He's a great writer. Definitely would read more of his books. And The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life, is the title. And essentially the theme of the book is we all pursue the first mountain, which is growing up and building a career and getting accolades and building competence and taking care of building a family or getting financially secure, etc. All the things that you and I have done to get to this point in our life. And then he says at some point, you start to question whether this is really the mountain, this, essential, the American dream. Is this the only mountain? And sometimes you just question that naturally. Other times you have life happen to you. You have a death that with someone near to you, you lose your job, you have something good happen that makes you reassess and essentially ask the question is this what it's all about? Is this it? I know, and sometimes that can be a valley, right? For me, I remember my moment, and there are a lot of parallels in this, especially early on in the book in my journey, at least for me, that early on, I had a personal crisis in my 40s, and it caused me to reassess, is this the person that I am? Is this what I value? Is this how I want to live in the world? And that started the journey of fixing that crisis and using it as a springboard, but also professionally rearranging my entire life. And I've talked about that some on the show before. So that was I'm done with the first mountain. And the second mountain, which is the one that you don't really know about early on when you're pursuing that first mountain of gratification and success, the second mountain is much deeper, David would argue, in that it's more about commitment and it's more selfless than that initial mountain. And the book says, hey, this could happen in the 20s, but generally it can happen in the 30s, 40s. At some point, you ask, is this all there is? So I think for you and me in this stage of life, there are a lot of things that resonate that might help build a framework to help you navigate wherever you're at in your journey. No doubt in the Rock Retirement Club, we will do a book study on this because there's a lot of meat in there, a lot of highlights in my book anyway. So those are the books that I have read. Currently, I'm rereading The How of Happiness, A New Approach to Getting the Life You Want by Sonia I can't pronounce her last name. We actually had her on the show like 4 or 5 years ago. It's a great book on the science of happiness. It's not foo-foo. She is a researcher and a professor, so I definitely would recommend that. I'm rereading that. I'm reading the originals. I'm doing that in audio. And then I'm midway through Red Teaming, How Your Business Can Conquer the Competition by Challenging Everything, which I think has a lot of applicability to retirement planning and not getting tunnel vision. So those are the books I'm reading. Hopefully you enjoyed that. We'll share the links on 6-Shot Saturday. And if you have books that you love and you think that I might enjoy, you can reply in 6-Shot Saturday and share those with me. Now let's get on to your listener questions. All right, we're off to answer some of your questions. If you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger. All right. First question is from Chris looking at his investments. He says, hey, Roger and Nicole, I love listening to the show and enjoy how you include health and money topics. I was considering rolling my 403b into an IRA and making it an all ETF IRA. I was considering a 60-40 allocation, something similar to the list below. What do you think of an all ETF IRA What do you think of the allocation sectors below? Can you recommend any specific ETFs? Hey, Chris, I appreciate the question. We do not recommend specific ETFs. We don't give advice to anyone. I do think having a target allocation based on the time frame for the assets in question is a good idea. And there's nothing particularly wrong with having an exchange-traded fund portfolio. That exchange-traded fund is very much like your traditional open-end mutual fund. It's just has some different quirkiness to it, right? There's more transparency. It trades intraday. Tax-wise, there are better benefits. In this case, 403(b) to an IRA wouldn't really matter. But ETF structure can be very efficient. And so nothing wrong with having an all ETF IRA, just like there's nothing wrong with having an all mutual fund IRA. I think the key here, Chris, is that this IRA should have a purpose within the broader strategy of your retirement plan. And once you understand that purpose, that will drive what the asset allocation is, whether it's 60% stocks and 40% bonds that you mentioned, or whether it's 100% stocks or 80% stocks. That will be based on the purpose of this account. And the longer the time horizon, the more equity-centric it will be. And we call it pie cakes or building layers. You could call it bucketing, whichever way you want to frame it. I think that's the key decision. What is this account for, and what is the target allocation based on the time horizon and when I'm going to need it? That's really important. Now, when you get down to, okay, I have my allocation, and let's assume you have your asset allocation here, Chris, of 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Now, what ingredients do I put into this recipe? And there are different ingredients that you could use. You could use individual stocks or bonds. You could use open-end mutual funds. You could use ETFs. And I think ETFs are totally appropriate. Now, you did list a number of ETFs with allocations. And honestly, I don't want to comment on it publicly because I don't want to give you specific advice. But one thing I did notice, you have, let's see here, in equities, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions. And in fixed income, you have 3 positions. So you have 8 ETFs to build this 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. So you have 8 positions, a lot of them at 10%, a few at 5%. One thing I would suggest, so one is, yes, ETFs are fine. The ones that you're choosing look like they're index-based ETFs, so they're going to be very efficient and they're going to be very cost-effective. Where I find people going wrong in building asset allocations is that they use too many pieces. Now, 8 isn't that bad from how many pieces or ingredients do you have in this portfolio? But when we look at the 8 that you have, let's say, S&P 500, total stock market index, things like that. Each one of those pieces has thousands. Well, the S&P 500 has 500, but the other ones have thousands of positions in them. And so adding more positions doesn't necessarily get you more diversification. And that's something to understand, because the more pieces, the individual pieces you have, in this case, 8 pieces that you shared with me, we have to think of, once you have those 8 pieces in place and you buy them, now, if you're going to implement an asset allocation strategy effectively, you're going to want to rebalance them periodically, correct? To get back to the allocation that you said that you want. Well, the more pieces you have, the more friction you will have in rebalancing, because you're going to have to calculate, and then execute more trades to get back to your target allocation. I think most people are way over diversified. Well, let me rephrase that. Not most people. I don't know. I encounter more people that are way over diversified than under diversified, by having things that really aren't adding value, but they're adding more complexity to a portfolio. So a total stock portfolio, in theory, has the total stock market. I don't know why you would need, say, the S&P 500 or other things around that. You want to make sure you understand why you're doing it. So I think 8 is not too bad. I think Fidelity, when I've seen clients with Fidelity asset allocation programs, there's like 40 different mutual funds in there. They're a mess, in my opinion. So 8's not too bad, Chris. But ETFs are totally fine. Make sure you understand what the purpose of the money is. Let that determine your allocation, and ETFs as a key component of that allocation, totally fine. All right, our next question comes from Larry. And actually, I think it's some feedback on what he's doing with intentionality, which is the core of what heroic retirement is. And we'll be integrating heroic retirement and probably have its own segment where we'll be talking about this from a non-financial. But I wanted to play Larry's feedback on how he's being intentional about his life.
Hi, Roger. Just wanted to say I love the podcast. I'm a recent retiree. And a lot of the things you're talking about that are non-financial are really things that should be talked more about and people should be aware of. I wasn't when I retired. One of the things that I've discovered is to try to be more intentional. So I have done things like have created an intentional eating plan each day, knowing what my meals and snacks will be for the day, and also exercise plan, an intentional moving plan. So things that I will do exercise each day, something different each day. And that has really helped me stay on track. And I love the new heroic discussion about setting some intentions in the morning also for the way you're going to show up each day. I think it's great. I also wanted to share that I have an intentional plan that my wife and I have been doing each month for activities. So each month trying to come up with something different that's not, going out to dinner, but each month having something special like a concert or a trip. These different intentions have been really, really great for me in helping me guide my retirement. Thanks for all you do. The podcast is great. Keep up the good work.
Hey, Larry, that's awesome. It sounds like you and your wife are, being intentional about making sure you make your life what you want it to be. When today, I know we've seen a lot of difference here while we've been here in Colorado on the days that we've been intentional about what we want to do each day rather than the days that we just sort of meander. Now, it's good to do that every now and then, but having an intention is definitely a key aspect of Rocky Retirement. So good for you, man. Our next question comes from Steve on taking portfolio withdrawals. Steve says, hey, Roger, I've been a listener for about 3 years. Love the show. Not only have I learned much that I apply for myself, but I've learned things to help friends as well. So thanks. You're welcome, man. I'm hoping you can help me with a question. I've seen data regarding investing of a lump sum, either doing it all at once or dollar cost averaging. And the evidence seems to point to a slight benefit to investing the lump sum all at once. This benefit increases the longer investment time horizon, but does not seem to be a huge difference maker. My question, when in distribution mode, is it better to take out a year's worth of expenses in a lump sum or dollar cost average or periodic withdrawals? I have not seen any data on this. Obviously, if the market is rising, the math would favor the dollar cost averaging approach, while a falling market would dictate a lump sum withdrawal approach. And we can't predict the future. I have about 7 or 8 years of expenses in cash equivalents, depending on inflation, so I am not yet withdrawing from my IRAs. And I calculate that I probably will not have to start withdrawals until I hit RMDs at age 72. So it sounds like you're in a great position. It's a good question, Steve. The short and incomplete answer is that because the market as a whole has historically gone up, the best answer on average is to leave the money in the market for as long as possible. But I don't think that's the best way to do it because the game changes when you're retiring. Retiring. The game changes when you're retiring. When you are investing money in the accumulation phase, you are about optimizing every dollar by taking investment risk, contributing systematically, getting it in there as soon as you can so you can have time in the markets work for you. That is a great optimization strategy in the accumulation phase. In the decumulation phase, the entire game changes, and it's not about optimizing every dollar that's in there based off of averages, because you're not going to get average. None of us are. And when you're in retirement, let's assume you're age 60, your time horizon really starts to shrink from 20, 30, 40 years to 10, 20, maybe 25 years. Your time horizon shrinks, and you care much more about which iteration you get in withdrawing money, much more than you do in the accumulation phase. It's about creating life outcomes. It's not about maximizing every potential dollar. because when you optimize something and things go wrong, in the accumulation phase, you're continuing to add money, which allows you to work your way out of it, and you have a long time frame. But when you are in the withdrawal phase, you're much more fragile. If you have a bad sequence of return in your dollar cost averaging, that can have a big impact to your actual life and the trajectory of what you or you and your spouse can do 5 years, 10 years down the road. It may cause you to not have the retirement outcome you want because of the bad luck of the draw. So I am not a big fan of dollar cost averaging out of markets. I believe that sequence of return risk is one of the biggest risks that you have, especially early in retirement. And you should build your pie cake and have money set aside to cover the expenditures that you want to have. A good example is, as we build this house in Colorado, I'm going to have money due. Should I dollar cost average out to pay my builder for this house that we're going to build and just hope that I get the average roll of the draw? Of course not. Well, paying me is much more important than paying the builder, and paying you in this case. You wouldn't dollar cost average out to pay your mortgage. That's pretty risky. And so I'm not a big believer in that. And I doubt the math supports that dollar cost averaging out is a good idea. It's going to cause more volatility to your life. But it sounds like in your case, you have a good cushion built up. You have 7 to 8 years of expenses in cash or cash equivalents. And I would definitely try to be efficient with that. So in this case, I don't know if it applies to you because you're not needing to withdraw money out. But go to some of our episodes on building a pie cake and why that's important. And that might give you some frameworks that might help flesh it out. But I definitely don't like the idea of doing systematic withdrawals for money you need to spend on your life. All right. Our next question is some feedback actually from Lisa. And she says, hey, Roger and Nicole, regarding the elderly parents who are overspending. And this is a question that we had a few months ago. Let me see if I can find the episode. We'll have it in Six Shot Saturday. We had a question about this a few weeks ago. Regarding the elderly parents who are respending, have they tried a visual aid? I find using something like a graph to be helpful. One graph showing the age at which their funds will be depleted at their current spending levels, and another graph showing how that changes with an adjustment in their spending. Also, you mentioned the possibility of a decrease in their cognitive abilities, which is also a concern. Consider also their emotional state of mind. How long are they planning to live? If they decided that they only have a year or two left mentally, however realistic or not that might be, they aren't going to be interested in a longer time frame. I went through this recently and hope these suggestions help. Lisa, you bring up two great points. So thank you so much for sharing that feedback. And that's essentially one, find different ways of communicating with people, and perhaps graphs or visual aids might be more impactful than words and spreadsheets. And the second one, I didn't even think about that, Lisa, but that's a great point. If mentally, I think I'm done. I think I only got 2 or 3 years left. Of course, you're going to spend your money. And that could be just from their assessment on their health, or it could be emotionally. They might have some worries and it's manifesting, oh, my life is over, I'm going to spend money. And I think that's a great thing to look out for as well, Lisa. I had a client once years ago who passed away who had some major cardiac issues. And he would go to the doctor and he was literally planning a timeline of really how long he had to live. And he was an aggressive spender, knowing that he wasn't going to live a normal lifespan. And it was an interesting dance over 7 or so years with him of him wanting to spend more and do things and me trying to allow that and honor that, but also think, what happens if this guy lives to 90? So yeah, there's a lot of things going on there that you need to think of. So thanks so much, Lisa. Our last question is from Joan on big expenses while approaching retirement. Hey, Roger and Nicole, I'm feeling a bit less than heroic, but plowing through. I'm 62 years old, married, 30 years in September. Congratulations. And sort of retired. I gave up retail management to work in schools as a teacher's aide. This is a minimum wage job. My husband is still in retail. He's 60 and carrying the burden of our financial life. He covers the medical. He also has an HSA and a 401k that he's contributing 20% to. We live in a high real estate tax New York. Our home is paid for, but it's getting scary. We are going into cash to pay for home repairs and big ticket items. Should we reduce pre-tax 401k to save ourselves and have some more free cash flow? Even though we are at about $110,000 in income, now we still pay taxes because we don't have enough deductions. However, our crazy real estate taxes are $15,000. By the way, I've read several of your reading suggestion. Good choices. So, Joan, big ticket items as you're coming up to retirement, they can be scary because they're a big drain on assets. And it sounds like you've lived in a home for a long period of time, and homes have repairs, right? And you have to keep the home up to a certain condition. Now, should you decrease your 401k to increase your cash flow so you don't go into your cash quite as often? And again, this can't be advice, Joan, because it's going to be on the totality of your situation. But I would look at it decreasing your 401k, at least to the point of any match that his company gives, and then trying to build up some after-tax cash. Because it sounds like you don't have any after-tax cash because you're dipping into money. So you may not have as much of an emergency fund and cash cushion as you need. And given that you're 60 and 62, depending on when you're going to retire, I think now is a good time to make sure you have enough in the after-tax bucket. But again, that's my suggestion based on the limited facts that I have here. Now, other things that you can start thinking about is to try to have a plan in place so you and your husband can see forward a little bit. Because when you're dealing with these immediate needs, which are important, it's triage. You also want to be able to look a little bit farther out to say, what is the long-term trajectory of this course that we're on? And that could be, how long does he work? How will you pay for life when he doesn't work? Does it make sense to be in this home that we've lived in for this long period of time with high taxes that is going to need repairs? Or are there other options that might give us more financial flexibility? And you want to do that in an organized way. And it doesn't really matter how many zeros you have behind all these numbers. The approach needs to be the same. So definitely do some triage now to maybe improve your cash flow by lowering 401k. I think that's a good option to consider. But then start to look forward a little bit and say, is this sustainable? And if you don't feel that it is, then you can start to explore, what options do I have to get on a sustainable path? You think of being heroic, as you said, Joan, and we think of hope for the future, right? And there's three things you need for hope. You need, I have a vision of a better future for myself. We got to have that. And then we have to figure out, what power do I have to work to create that future for myself? And in this case, it might be where I'm not so worried about all these repairs and big expenses. That's the future self. And then what agency do you have? Well, yes, you could lower your 401k to build a cash cushion. You could consider other options. What agency do you have? What can you do to improve that? And then you'll develop different pathways. One could possibly be decreasing the 401k. Another could be looking at a reverse mortgage when you get to the appropriate age, or it could be using a HELOC. It could be downsizing the house. I don't know, but think of that framework and you're more apt to be more empowered to take action to improve the situation. So hopefully that helps you, Joan. All right, with that, let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. In the next 7 days, rather than focus on taking action on something, maybe it's that anniversary that you want to do something big for, or maybe it's finally cleaning out the garage, or finally getting out of budget, whatever it is, we tend to want to do big actions with something that we know we need to deal with. Rather than do that, I challenge you in the next 7 days, find one little tiny thing that you can implement in your life and do it consistently. Consistency always trumps action or big actions. Consistency is what's going to allow you to create major change and major progress in your life. So as an example, one of the things that I do consistently every day is I meditate for about 10 minutes. And that's just literally sitting silent, practicing breathing, and being grateful. I do that consistently. So what's the one thing you can do consistently over the next 7 days to start building a habit to help you rock retirement? All right. I can't wait to get back to the studio. I feel so out of sorts chatting with you while sitting on a mattress in a bedroom. I hope you are having a wonderful end of summer, and we will chat soon. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.